Have you ever just stopped and wondered how our massive, incredibly complex global economy actually works? I mean, really works. For centuries, some of the smartest people on the planet have tried to crack that code. And honestly, they've come up with some wildly different answers. So today, we're going to unpack those big ideas and give you a whole new toolkit for seeing how the world ticks.
So what is it really? Is it this perfectly balanced machine that just runs on its own if we leave it alone? Or is it more like a brutal battlefield where different groups are constantly fighting for their piece of the pie? Or hey, maybe it's just one giant chess match where every move you make is all about what you think the other person's going to do next. We're going to explore all of these because how you answer this one question, well, it changes everything.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the original operating manual, the idea of the invisible hand. Then, we'll see how that very idea was put on trial. We'll dig into why the government decided it had to step in, how modern theories started seeing it all as one big game, and finally, we'll pull back the curtain on the unseen structures that are really running the show.
So, let's kick things off with the big one, the foundational idea that shaped centuries of policy. It's this belief that the economy is a beautiful, self-correcting system that works best when we just get out of the way.
This is what we call classical economics, and it really got started back in the 18th century with a guy named Adam Smith. The core belief is super simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Markets, when you just leave them to their own devices, will create order and prosperity all by themselves. The motto was laissez-faire, which is just a fancy French way of saying, let it be.
And this right here perfectly explains Smith's most famous idea, the invisible hand. Think about it. The baker isn't some saint trying to feed the poor. They're trying to make a living, right? They're motivated by their own self-interest. But, and this is the magic part, in a free market, that drive to earn a profit has this amazing unintended consequence of making sure we all get our bread. It's millions of people all making decisions for themselves that somehow coordinates into a society that actually works, without anyone being in charge.
Okay, but not everybody saw this, harmonious dance. A radically different theory came along that looked at the exact same economy and saw something else entirely. Not cooperation, but conflict.
And this slide just lays it all out. You've got these two fundamentally opposite worldviews. Where Adam Smith saw harmony, Karl Marx looked at the factories of the Industrial Revolution and saw a battlefield. For him, the real source of value wasn't some magical price that just appears from supply and demand. No, for him, it was human labor. And the outcome wasn't going to be prosperity for everyone, it was going to be exploitation. And eventually, revolution.
So how did Marx see this exploitation actually working? Well, it all comes down to this key concept he called surplus value. Let's break it down. Say a worker in a factory makes $500 worth of chairs in a single day. But the factory owner only pays that worker an $80 wage. Marx's big question was, where does that other $420 go? He called it surplus value, and he argued it was basically profit that was extracted directly from the worker's labor. For him, this wasn't some flaw in the system, it was the system. And it's an idea that's still at the heart of debates today about things like the minimum wage and corporate profits.
Now, that classical belief in a self-healing economy, it held on for over a century, but then a crisis hit. A crisis so massive, so devastating, it completely shattered those old beliefs and forced everyone to rethink the entire game. It was time for the government to step in.
The Great Depression in the 1930s was the ultimate test. The markets weren't self-correcting, they were in a death spiral. And this chaos opened the door for John Maynard Keynes and his radical new ideas. But then, fast forward to the 1970s, and his ideas were challenged by something called stagflation. That's high inflation and stagnant growth happening at the same time, which in turn gave rise to a whole new set of theories designed to fight a completely different kind of economic problem.
Keynes's big insight was something he called the paradox of thrift. Think about it. When a recession hits, it's totally rational for you as an individual to save your money and cut back on spending. But, and here's the paradox, when everybody does that at the same time, the entire economy grinds to a halt. So, his solution was simple. If people and businesses won't spend, the government has to step in and become the spender of last resort.
And this leads to the famous multiplier effect. That $1 the government spends to build a bridge, it doesn't just stop there. It ripples through the entire economy. The construction worker who earns it goes and buys groceries. The grocer then uses that money to buy some new equipment, and on it goes. The idea is that each dollar of government spending can actually generate more than $1 in total economic activity. This is the basic logic behind everything from building new roads to sending out stimulus checks during a crisis.
But by the 70s, Keynesian ideas were struggling to explain why inflation was so high, and two major critiques popped up. You had the monetarists, led by Milton Friedman, who said, hey, the problem isn't spending, it's the money supply itself. Their solution, just have the central bank focus on keeping the growth of money stable and predictable. Then on the other side, you had the supply-siders. They said the real problem was that high taxes and regulations were choking businesses. Their solution, cut taxes, slash regulations, and unleash a wave of new investment. And that philosophy heavily influenced leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher.
So far, pretty much all of these big theories we've talked about assumed one fundamental thing, that people are rational economic actors. But what if we aren't? This next wave of ideas started questioning that very foundation by looking at the weird psychology behind the choices we make.
This is the famous prisoner's dilemma, and it's a cornerstone of what's called game theory. Look at this. The most rational choice for each prisoner acting on their own is to betray the other one. It always gives them a better or equal outcome no matter what the other person does. But if they both make that rational choice, they both end up way worse off than if they had just cooperated and stayed silent. It's this brilliant illustration of how individual self-interest can lead to a collectively awful result. We see this play out everywhere, from corporate price wars to international arms races.
Okay, quick question for you. Think about it honestly. Would you get in your car and drive 20 minutes to save $5 on a $15 book? You know what? Most people say yeah, they would.
Now how about this? Same 20-minute drive, same $5 saving, but this time it's on a $500 TV. All of a sudden, most people say, no way, not worth it. And this is a huge finding from behavioral economics. Logically, $5 is $5. It's the same amount of money. But we don't think logically. Our sense of value is all relative, not absolute. We are not the perfectly rational machines that the older theories assumed we were. And understanding these little biases is now central to everything from how products are marketed to us to how governments design public health campaigns.
Okay, so for our final set of theories, we're going to zoom out. We're going to look beyond all the individual choices, whether they're rational or not, and focus on the hidden frameworks, the real rules and institutions that govern the entire economic system.
New institutional economics makes a really important point. Markets don't just exist in a vacuum. They need rules to work. Think about all the transaction costs, all the friction involved in doing business, like the time and money it takes to negotiate a contract. Well, institutions, things like clear property rights, reliable courts, and even the existence of corporations, are all designed to reduce that friction and make the whole economy run smoother. It helps explain why some countries with tons of natural resources can still be poor. They just don't have the strong institutions needed for markets to really thrive.
So, what happens when you take that same skeptical economic lens and you turn it on the government itself? Well, that's what public choice theory does. It totally challenges the cozy idea that politicians and bureaucrats are always just acting for the public good. Instead, it assumes they're rational actors just like everyone else, pursuing their own self-interest, which might mean getting reelected or expanding their department's budget or just rewarding their political allies.
And this theory is brilliant for explaining why some really bad policies can stick around for decades. It's all about concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. Take a tariff on sugar. It might provide millions and millions of dollars to a very small group of sugar producers. That's a concentrated benefit. But the cost is just a few extra dollars a year for every single consumer. That's a dispersed cost. Now, who do you think is going to lobby harder? The producers will fight tooth and nail to protect their millions. While none of us have a strong enough reason to get organized and fight back over a few bucks, it's a super powerful way to understand how politics really works.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway? It's that none of these theories is the one final capital T truth. They're all just lenses. They're different ways of looking at our incredibly complex world. Each one gives you a different piece of the puzzle. The goal isn't to find one hammer that works for every problem. The goal is to have a versatile toolkit so you can pick the right tool for the job.
And that brings us to one last really powerful idea, this one from the Austrian school. And it kind of circles back to where we started. They argue that maybe we should just stop trying to manage the economy like it's some kind of machine in the first place. Instead, we should see it as this complex, evolving network, a spontaneous order that just emerges from the free choices of millions of individuals. It's something that's way too intricate for any central planner to ever really understand, let alone control.
So now you've got the toolkit. When you look at the news, when you think about your own financial decisions, or you hear about the policies being debated, which one of these lenses best explains the world you see? Is it the invisible hand, the class struggle, the strategic game, or the unseen structures? The truth is, The answer probably changes depending on what you're looking at. And really, that's the whole point.